More than half a century later, we find ourselves living in a very different world than what Oppenheimer supposedly hoped for. According to the United Nations, the Darfurian genocide has claimed over 200,000 people's lives during 5 years of ongoing war, famine, and disease. In Afghanistan, there have been over 1,000 coalition deaths, while other sources report over 10,000 civilian deaths. In Iraq, sources report over 1 million violent deaths as a result of the American invasion and occupation. And these are just a few of the wars that are plaguing our earth as we speak. Death in numbers. We may need to separate ourselves from our environment for a moment to truly feel the weight of these facts. We have to remember that we are talking about people, men, women, and children, just like us, who have died senselessly to benefit the few that hold the power and wish to increase their grip. And so as these wars rage on, we must have all asked ourselves, when will it end? Even if only once, as images of mangled children pinned beneath collapsed buildings sneak their way in between celebrity-endorsed fast food commercials. Yes, we must have grown a little tired, a little scared, a little angry by now. But where do we turn? I am only one person on a planet made up of over 6 billion. I live far away from places like Afghanistan, in a country that has been blessed with an abundance of renewable and non-renewable energy sources, and free access to education and medical care. What can I possibly accomplish from here? This was in fact the very same question that gave rise to Canadians Against War. We are an online community composed of like-minded people that wish to speak out against war in any and in every way that we can. We understand that wars have been fought for hundreds and hundreds of years, and accordingly acknowledge that the negative results have almost always outweighed the positive ones. And today, never have words rung so true than when Hemingway said, "They wrote in the old days that it is sweet and fitting to die for one's country. But in modern war, there is nothing sweet nor fitting in your dying. You will die like a dog for no good reason." Our members acknowledge that war is fought differently now, usually with less losses on the aggressor's side and more civilian deaths on the opponent's side. Accordingly, we support the notion that there is no such thing as a smart weapon, because weapons aim to kill. We also recognize that democracy does not fall from the sky in the form of bombs. Today, bombs have only carried free market capitalism and neo-imperialist values. Canadians Against War also recognizes that there are people from all over the world that support peaceful means of conflict resolution, and as a result, we do not blame whole populations for the acts of their governments. World peace may just be the only thing worth fighting for. And we want you to join us as we fight war, not with cluster bombs or surface-to-air missiles, but with our collective knowledge, education, passionate beliefs, and unbreakable unity. Please join me in welcoming him.
So first on to the question of whether Iran is dangerous. And I'm reminded of a fictional Iranian comic who many people here may be familiar with. His name is Mullah Nasruddin. He's supposed to be a wise guy. There are many stories in the folklore in Western and Central Asia about him. And in one episode, he is looking outside in the courtyard of the house, searching for something for, let's say, half an hour. And so finally his wife comes out and says, "What are you looking for that is so difficult to find?" Mullah says that I'm looking for the keys. I've lost my keys. So his wife says, "Okay, well, I'll help you search." And they look some more and don't find anything. So finally his wife asks, "Well, where did you lose the keys, do you think?" Mullah says, "In the basement." So, of course, his wife's natural reaction is, "So why are you looking outside for your keys?" And he says, "Because it's too dark in the basement." Right? So American policy towards the region, the Middle East, and towards Iran reminds me of that very much. Because if terrorism is the issue, then why is the United States allied with Saudi Arabia and Pakistan? None of the people who attacked the United States in 2001 were from Iran or have been linked personally or in terms of a money trail to Iran. So why not Why isn't the American administration and media, why aren't they focusing on making Pakistan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia pay more attention to the they're breeding grounds for terrorists, for extremists. Why aren't they focusing on there? Yes, Iran supports the Hezbollah in Lebanon and supports Hamas in Palestine. And those are organizations that, depending on your point of view, are either resistance movements or terrorist organizations. But in either case, Iran does not have to support those organizations, but is forced to, because the Iranian government has felt hostility from the West and mainly from the United States for almost 3 decades now, and so therefore these are defensive measures in my view. Then there's the other question of Iran meddling in Iraq and destabilizing Iraq, sending arms there, and so on. There is some truth to that, in that I believe that Iran does fund various organizations in Iraq. But then if we are focused on foreign powers meddling in Iraq, the first question should be, what the hell are the United States and Britain doing in there? At least Iran shares historic and religious ties to Iraq. And, by the way, Iran's intervention in Iraq is very much welcomed by a government in Baghdad that's handpicked by the United States. So what's the problem? Not to mention that, according to many sources, the Saudi Arabia is funding also groups in Iraq that are at least as extremist as are the Shi'i groups, militias in Iraq. So my point is that this is an excuse to harass Iran and to beat up on Iran. Similarly, with the issue of this nuclear dispute with Iran. I'll spend a little more time on that because the American administration does. You know, that's their main argument for saying that Iran is dangerous. Well, Iran's nuclear program started during the Shah's administration in the 1970s, which an administration that was backed by the United States very tightly. In fact, during the Ford administration in mid-70s, and with the close involvement of figures like Henry Kissinger and Brzezinski, and, by the way, Paul Wolfowitz and Donald Rumsfeld, they pushed for Iran to sign, to purchase from General Electric and Westinghouse, other American corporations, up to 12 nuclear reactors. And in fact, the Shah made clear, his own record, having said that we will develop nuclear weapons. But you know what? Washington wasn't worried about it. Back then, there were some arguments saying, from Iran, saying that Iran has so much oil and gas. The Iranians said, what do we need nuclear power for? And the Americans, who wanted these billions of dollars for their reactors, they said, well, save your oil and gas for future generations. It's too precious to burn. So use nuclear power. Now that Iran's population has more than tripled, and because of vast industrialization and rural electrification, Iran's need for energy has much more than tripled. The same folks in Tehran, in Washington, the same folks, who we know now as neoconservatives are saying, well, you have so much gas and oil. What do we need nuclear energy for? Now, I want to make clear, I'm not a proponent of nuclear weapons or nuclear power generation. But my position and my group's position is that it's up to the Iranians to decide that, because when other nations decided to have nuclear power or nuclear bombs, they didn't ask anybody for permission. They didn't consult us. World security is a shared security. We need common security. And if every nation is to decide for itself, then Iran has the same right. Another reason why this issue, the nuclear dispute, is something that's suspicious to me. This is, to me, it's a lot of fuss about nothing. Is because the American administrations have, for almost 3 decades, have made clear that they really find it difficult to live with the Iranian government. They miss the good old days when they had their puppet government in Iran in power, and they want to get that back. Why? Because we have a lot of oil and gas. And they want Iran to become as defenseless as Iraq did so that they can dictate to it. If, in fact, this nuclear issue, if it were a major proliferation issue, then the United States, what would the United States be doing would be to strengthen the International Atomic Energy Commission, which conducts inspections in Iran. The United States would be strengthening the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran was one of the earliest signatories to the NPT and has so far, I argue, that Iran has not violated the NPT. In fact, the United States has, and its allies. Now, you ask, how? Actually, it's very straightforward. The NPT requires or imposes a set of obligations, a different set of obligations, on the countries that already have nuclear weapons and the rest of the nations. Countries like Iran have obligated themselves not to develop nuclear weapons, but in exchange to receive nuclear technology assistance from the haves, so to speak, from the United States, Britain, England, France, and so on, who have nuclear weapons. The haves committed themselves through the NPT to provide that assistance, but also they committed themselves to reduce and eventually eliminate their nuclear stockpile. They haven't done so. How long has it been? More than 30 years. In fact, if anything, the nuclear powers, including Russia and China, they have increased their nuclear stockpile, and the United States and Britain are working as we speak to, quote unquote, modernize and expand their nuclear arsenal. Now, people say that, well, Iran, we are suspicious of Iran's nuclear intentions because for almost 2 decades, Iran developed its nuclear program up until the early 2000s, a few years ago, in a clandestine manner. They bought nuclear technology and components from a black market, mainly in Pakistan. Now, why did they do that if their intentions were not suspect? Good question. I would like to know too. The reason that Iran gives for this is actually makes some sense. They say that we went to many countries in the West, Germany, Britain, the United States, as well as to China, by the way, in the late 80s, and shopped for people, for companies who would come to Iran and build nuclear reactors for us. As I said before, I'm not getting into a question of whether Iran needs nuclear reactors or not. That's not the question I'm posing. But let's say that just like NPT stipulates, Iran has a right, as much as any other country, to make its own decision about having nuclear reactors. So Iran shopped for this. And remember, the NPT obligates the countries that have this technology to help Iran. But under pressure mainly from the United States, none of those countries, even though some came close to cooperating with Iran, providing nuclear technology, others under pressure from the United States, they stopped. Only Russia agreed, as you probably know, to build one single nuclear reactor in Iran, which is now nearing completion after years of delay, again, because of US pressure. So if you were the leaders of a country that thought it has a legitimate right to have a nuclear power capability, power generation, electricity generation, and the world's bully, basically, the United States, was denying you your right. What would you do? You would go underground. You would insist on your rights, and you would look to buy that technology somewhere else. So I don't buy that argument, that this necessarily implies that Iran's intentions are building nuclear weapons.